The key difference from other points of view is that, in my opinion, a crossover should be light. I like to feel light handling both in-city and on twisty roads. This is not only because a light motorcycle can be ridden fearlessly on single trails, but also because it feels more like a true motorcycle on the road, which is why I stopped buying bikes with engines larger than 1000 cc's. They all feel like hippos, which for me is worse than the extra power of 100 or 120 horses than that of a 900cc motorcycle. I've ridden on all the competitors before, but to remember the feeling, I spent a couple weeks riding on not only the Multistrada but also the Tiger 900 GT Pro, Tiger Sport 800, and the new BMW F900 XR, and the Tracer 9. I can't recommend the new Multistrada V2 to everyone, I'll explain later, but for me, it's definitely the best crossover. Overall, there were 3 things I didn't like about the older version: the engine tuning, the suspension, and the weight. The first thing you notice is that about the new Multistrada is that it does feel very light. The curb weight is 212 kilograms. And the S version I tested is 3 kilograms heavier. It's the lightest crossover in over 800 cc's or 100 horsepower class, but even knowing that, it still feels like a feather. The old Multistrada is 18 kilograms heavier. That's a different story. The problem with that old generation was that it weighed and felt exactly the same as Multistrada 1260. If you had enough money for a 1200cc motorcycle, there was no point in buying the smaller Multistrada. And since Multistradas are traditionally more expensive, the price difference with an inexpensive 1200cc bike was not significant. The Ducati trick is that they have no strict budget constraints for their models, so they can afford to implement what other manufacturers' engineers can only dream of. This is the only mid-range crossover with a monocoque frame, which is a very light type of frame with a given rigidity but also expensive. The capital costs for robot machines are higher with separate costs required for each model, and the material itself is more expensive, requiring greater precision and greater quality control. For manufacturers with small batches, such costs will never pay off, and mass producers are not willing to raise the price of a bike just to shed 4 kilograms. On the one hand, Ducati already has fairly larger sales, plus it can use the Volkswagen's product capacity and purchase prices. On the other hand, Ducati is virtually unlimited in price, so they can do interesting things. As for the frame load, suffice to say that Ducati allows a payload of 240 kilograms, which is at least 20 kilograms more than any other competitor. I'm too lazy to double check all the old crossovers, but I'm sure it is the highest payload ever allowed on a crossover. The lightweight swing arm and engine are just as advanced, but the most interesting thing is that this is a rare mid-sized crossover with a variable valve timing. This is nothing new on a flagship bike with a liter engine, but mid-sized engines are generally pretty simple. The Multistrada 1200 is considered the first true crossover with variable valve timing, but the Ducati is late to the game in the mid-sized crossover class. Last year, the Moto Guzzi V85 TT already acquired a similar system. You can also remember the Crossrunner from Honda, where half of the valves were dedicated at low revs, but the Crossrunner can hardly be called a crossover. The internal combustion engine operation diagram is usually shown like this. Here, the exhaust valve closes before the piston reaches the top dead center, and only when the piston moves down does the intake valve open and close before the piston moves up on the compression stroke. The separation of each stroke is clearly shown, but this rarely works in real life. The intake valve opens earlier when the piston is still moving upward, i.e. for a certain time. Both the intake and the exhaust valves are open at the same time. In the old Multistrada, the engine was called the Testastrada 11 degrees, where 11 is the number of degrees of the crankshaft rotation at which the intake and exhaust valves were simultaneously open. The exhaust gases are drawn into the exhaust port, and at this time the fresh fuel mixture is sucked into the cylinder by inertia, and the cylinder can begin to fill earlier even if a small portion of the fresh fuel mixture escapes into the exhaust. The sportier the camshafts, the longer the intake valves are open, including when the piston moves upward during the compression stroke, in order to push the maximum amount of mixture into the cylinder by inertia. This scheme works well with high revs, allowing for an increase of peak power, but fails at low revs. This is when the intake valves open too early on the exhaust stroke at low revs. Some of the exhaust gases remaining in the cylinder have time to enter the intake port. The cylinder then begins to suck in the mixture from the intake, but it enters together with the exhaust gases, which occupy some of the useful volume. In addition, when the pistons begin to move upward during the compression stroke, the intake valves, which a sports camshaft are still open for a significant part of the stroke, and at low revs, there is enough time for part of the mixture to escape back into the intake port before the valve closes. In the old Multistrada or Desert X, the valves did not open too early, but they closed with a significant delay, so at low revs, cylinder filling deteriorated noticeably. Part of the air mixture leaked from the cylinder, and the mixture remaining inside was partially mixed with exhaust gases, which resulted in less energy during ignition. This is the main reason why sporty engines sputter and shake at low revs, and now the problem has been exacerbated because new motorcycles run on a lean mixture. In the new engines, the valves open later at low revs, i.e. there is no valve overlap and the exhaust gases are not drawn into the intake. Also at low revs, the valves close earlier without sucking the mixture into the intake during the compression stroke. The engine runs more smoothly at low revs and is more fuel effective. On the other hand, at high revs, the overlap is greater than the old engine and the intake valves close later, filling the cylinder more efficiently, which allows for a longer effective speed range for the engine. The engine has not changed its character, it simply performs better at both low and high revs. The second related problem is that on sports engines, the moving parts themselves are lighter and lighter flywheel. This allows the engine to respond instantly to changes on the throttle position, but also to receive an instant response for all hiccups. In the new engine, the flywheel is 20% heavier than the old one. The heavier the flywheel, the more difficult it is to slow or accelerate, so the engine's response is smoothed out. Here's an analogy. If you try to accelerate or stop the spinning wheel of a car and a bicycle with the same force, the car wheel will respond less to the impact. The heavier the flywheel, the smoother the engine runs, softening all jerks. But it is less responsive to changes in the throttle. How does the new Multistrada V2 engine feel in real life though? Obviously it's much better than it was. It doesn't shake and it is predictable at low speeds, but you have to understand that this is a mid-revving engine, and there is no fat torque at low revs due to the geometry. To understand, the Multistrada V2 engine has become ultra short stroked by twin cylinder standards. It has even less piston stroke than the triples like Tracer 9 and Tiger 900 of the same displacement. This is very similar to the diameter to piston stroke ratio of the MotoGP bikes. And if we take the 2027 MotoGP regulations, the ratio is the same as the Multistrada V2. As a result of the short stroke, the pistons are huge and vibration is to be expected. The Multistrada vibrates more than any triple with regular flashes, such as the Tiger Sport 800, Tracer 9, etc., but it's not as bad as it could be. The Multistrada definitely vibrates less than even the updated Tiger 900 with a damper, although the vibrations there are tolerable and there's noticeably less vibration than on the BMW 900 XR. Personally, I am not bothered by the average vibration of the Ducati at all. I can travel for weeks without complaining. Although the new Multistrada is clearly smoother in the city than the previous model, it is not a low-revving motorcycle, so don't get your hopes up. Plus, the Multistrada V2 has a rather heavy clutch lever that requires 2 fingers to operate. Outside the city, this isn't a problem. You can use the quick shifter, which is rougher than the Tigers, but precise. But in the city, you have to squeeze the clutch a lot, which is easier on the Tigers. As a purely urban motorcycle, the Multistrada is a strange choice, not because of the engine, but because of the handlebar that is 10 centimeters wider than the position of any competitors. In other scenarios, the engine is superb. Even on twisties, more smooth, it's predictable than the old one especially. Incidentally, an additional advantage of the dynamic phase is reduction of fuel consumption due to more optimal engine operation. The claimed fuel consumption of the new Multistrada V2 is half a liter per 100 kilometers less than the old one. But if you ride at a legal pace, the consumption is less than claimed and the range is par with its competitors. Everyone knows that this model has springs instead of a desmodronic valve system, and a chain instead of belts. All of this undoubtedly increases the reliability of the system and reduces maintenance costs. Now everything is the same as everyone else with a same service intervals. The V4 line has shown that after Audi took over strategic management, modern Ducatis are quite reliable motorcycles, so I'm not worried about the V2 in that line of sense. Audi oversees the transfer of key technologies between its internal premium brands and has stated that Ducati has access to all of its research centers for materials, safety, aerodynamics, etc. Ducati receives the same alloys and sensors at Volkswagen Group prices through a single purchasing service, and Audi coordinates Ducati's engineering work. This is a completely different level of development, and Ducati is now a completely different company. The dynamics of the Multistrada V2 engine are just right for me, with a feeling of power to spare. I don't even remember if I opened the throttle fully on the Multistrada. It was enough everywhere. The greatest pleasure, of course, comes from the combination of power and lightness on twisty roads. It always rolls from side to side more easily than you expect. No matter how you tune these big beasts, their weight still makes them too lazy to change direction. In addition, the Multistrada V2 has superb tuned geometry, just the way I like it, even a little sharper than it used to be. This is another reason why I rarely like 1200cc touring bikes. The power is higher. The engineers tuned the geometry for greater high-speed stability, and all the charm is lost. The V2 has the right sharpness and agility, roughly on par with the Tiger 900 GT and very close to the Tracer 9. The coolest thing is, of course, the handling combined with this suspension. It's definitely the best suspension in the class. Among crossovers, the Tiger 900 GT and the BMW 900 XR also have electronic suspension, but in both cases, only the shock absorber is electric, and the fork is manual. The Tracer 9 and the Turismo Veloce are not crossovers, so I'm not considering them. Considering that the Multistrada V2 has an electronic suspension with anti-dive and anti-squat algorithms, it is still a different level, despite my love for the Tiger 900 suspension. If the suspension on the old Multistrada was, in my opinion, too comfortable at the expense of handling, now in hard mode the suspension is really moderately stiff and the other modes are comfortable, just like on the old generation. As with the Multistrada V4, the suspension is now from Marzocchi. The Tiger 900 GT also has Marzocchi suspension with very similar settings. Both have the right range of settings, but considering that most people don't like to fiddle with screws, the Multistrada will feel better for most people thanks to the widest range of suspension settings in the class. What's more, Ducati has automatic preload, so you can set it and forget about it. And the electronics will do everything for you. What I like even more about the Multistrada V2 is that unlike its direct competitors, you can add spoked wheels as an option and ride it at 100 km an hour on gravel without worrying too much about the wheel rims, given the bike's low weight. The result is a super versatile bike. Not many people realize that the Multistrada will ride smoother on rough roads than most hardcore adventure bikes with 21-inch wheels because the suspension is tuned differently. If you want to ride comfortably over potholes and bumps without noticing the unevenness, you need to ride a motorcycle with skyhook, such as the Multistrada or the Africa Twin. Obviously, it would be silly to buy a Multistrada V2 for enduro, but I don't see any problem with enjoying off-road touring routes such as the TET or the TAT. Again, because the new Multistrada is lightweight, I don't think it will try to break itself in a fall. The factory crush bars are really well designed, with crossbars on the top and bottom. And the hand protection is good, unlike in previous versions with turn signals in the hand guards, which was clearly a bad idea. Another surprise is that the gearshift and brake pedals are foldable, and of course you can remove the rubber pads from the footrests, plus there are wide off-road footrests available as an option. You'll be hard-pressed to find a foldable brake pedal even on a hardcore adventure bikes, but here we have something like a sport crossover and everything is serious. If you want to save money, you can buy the basic version without semi-active suspension. It will have everything you need right away: cruise control, quick shifter, hand guards, cornering, ABS, and traction control, the same display, and fully adjustable suspension. If the S version is not in your budget, then go for it. The version with the semi-active suspension also has an auto-lowering mode, but it only lowers the seat by 8mm, which is not very useful. And the bike is about the same height as its classmates in terms of seat height. The difference is about 1 centimeter in one direction or the other. There is also an inexpensive lowering kit with other electronic shock absorbers, fork springs, and a short side stand. The bike will sit 2 centimeters lower and the lowered seats are available. Considering that the new Multistrada V2 has the highest ground clearance in its class, it will be more than versatile enough even in the lowered version. The ergonomics have slightly changed. Due to the narrow frame and engine, they were able to narrow the waist of the bike and slightly adjust the ergonomic points. The footrests remain at the same level and the handlebars have been moved slightly higher and further forward. I am tall. I like everything. Although I do think that some people of average height would need to stretch slightly to reach the handlebars, but this can be solved with inexpensive spacers. Even if you simply turn the handlebar, you will end up roughly in the same position as the old model. I feel comfortable. Plus, the display and windshield have been moved further away. The windshield itself is more vertical. The stock windshield is not high enough for tall riders, but with this angle, it's easy to install a taller one without the edge sticking into your nose. Moreover, the new windshield is wider, and when you compare it to the Tiger 800 or 900 windshields, it seems that the Ducati's one is twice as wide. It is very difficult to find an issue with a motorcycle in terms of comfort. Even the factory seat suits me. In terms of ergonomics, the motorcycle is definitely more comfortable than the Tracer 9, Tiger Sport 800, or 900 XR, at least for taller riders. The Tiger 900 is about the same in terms of comfort, comparable to the 1200cc adventure bikes. Of course, the Multistrada V4 is more comfortable, but by how much? Like 10%? For me, this difference, like the difference in power, is insignificant, unlike the extra 30 kilograms, which is why I prefer the 900cc motorcycles. And one more thing about the uniqueness of the Multistrada V2 for the mid-sized segment. The Multistrada has a floating system for all 3 panniers, which greatly reduces the bike's sway at speeds of over 120 kilometers an hour. This is nothing new on flagship models, although not all manufacturers offer it. But there are basically no current mid-sized bikes where all 3 panniers float at the same time except on the Multistrada V2, although it is obvious that such bikes ride just as fast as 1200cc bikes. Yes, you can cite the old Tiger 800 as an example, which had a pannier system with side clearance, but modern systems have moved on. Modern Ducati motorcycles always have the best aerodynamics in the class. They test every model in a wind tunnel and refine them to perfection. Although there wasn't the same feeling of stability as on the entire V4 line, it's not a big deal. Obviously, the brakes on the bike are excellent, with the highest level of predictability, which greatly affects the riding experience. The right top-of-the-line brakes allow you to ride faster because of the greater sense of control. You know exactly where the bike will be at any given braking point, so you don't have to leave 10 meters of margin. This is not about braking distance in an emergency. All in all, I am delighted with the bike, although I understand that it will not suit everyone, and I don't consider the Multistrada V2 to be perfect. But it's the best available. I like the combination of lightness, power, handling, comfort, and off-road capability. There are very few motorcycles with these characteristics that you can ride on single trails without fear, not just on roads. I don't think the Multistrada V2 will sell as well as the V4. The V2 is expensive, and many people will choose something bigger for the same price purely for the prestige. To buy a V2, it's simply not enough to be rich. You also need to know something about motorcycles. Thanks for watching.